The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
And now I find that some of my Republican colleagues are very distressed. They're very upset that somebody who's making $10, $12 an hour might end up with a paycheck for 4 months more than they received last week. Oh my God, the universe is collapsing. Imagine that. Somebody who's making $12 an hour, now like the rest of us, faces an unprecedented economic crisis with the $600 on top of their regular unemployment check, might be making a few bucks more for 4 months. Oh my word! Will the universe survive? How absurd and wrong is that? What kind of value system is that? Meanwhile, these very same folks had no problem a couple of years ago voting for $1 trillion in tax breaks for billionaires and large profitable corporations. Not a problem. But when it comes to low-income workers in the midst of a terrible crisis, maybe some of them earning or having more money than they previously made, oh my word, we got to strip that out. Got to tell those poor people that no matter what. And by the way, when the McConnell bill first came up, unbelievably, and I know many Republicans objected to this, they were saying that, well, we want to give whatever it was, $1,000 or $1,200, but poor people should get less. You see, because poor people are down here, they don't deserve, they don't eat, they don't pay rent, they don't go to the doctor, they're somehow inferior because they're poor, we're going to give them less. Well, that was addressed. Now everybody is going to get the $1,200. But some of my Republican friends still have not given up on the need to punish the poor and working people. You haven't raised the minimum wage in 10 years. Minimum wage should be at least $15 an hour. You haven't done that. You've cut program after program after program, and now, horror of horrors, for 4 months, workers might be earning a few bucks more than they otherwise
normally would. That's Bernie Sanders yesterday on the Senate floor, taking a stand on behalf of workers who have lost their job. 3.3 million new claims, unemployment claims, this week. Unprecedented. I don't think we've seen anything like this. Welcome to the show. I'm going to try to be as measured as I can today. I have my friend, Professor Matt Sienkiew. He's going to join me in a few, because I don't think I can make it through the show on my own today, mainly because of the reality, already setting in for me. Like I told you, I grieve, I mourn in advance. And this morning, it just hit me like a ton of bricks, what we're going through and what we're getting ready to go through and the difficulty of it. New York is being devastated right now. They're already, we're not even, I think we're ahead of the curve in terms of Italy, in terms of needing refrigerator trucks to carry the dead. Some municipalities across the country and likewise across the world, they're having to reserve ice skating rinks to store all the people who are dying. And so this morning it was just really tough. And I think we're going to have days like that, right? I mean, you probably have had days like that every other day. I think it hits me like once a week. But today was really just kind of a preemptive grief and mourning about what's happening, but the scale that it's getting ready to happen in. And it's almost as though there's nothing we can do about it because of the fecklessness of our leadership. And the downright insidiousness, the pure contempt. And this is why I'm trying to be measured. Oh, because these men clearly do not understand. They're not reading the writing on the walls. These leaders who are more concerned with controlling the masses than they are caring for the masses. They're more concerned about ensuring that you don't have enough to have independence and freedom, but that you are so desperate for your next check that you go out into the midst of this plague in order to serve capitalism. These men who are leading us clearly do not understand the score. When you have 3.3 million people who are dealing, many of which are dealing with unemployment for the very first time in their lives, the humility, the humiliation of it all, right? I talked about going through getting unemployment, but I didn't really just put it in a very direct terms. It's a humiliating process. And now you have 3.3 million people who varying stages and ranges of income, realizing that this system does not care about them. And not to make this about Bernie Sanders, because I do try to make sure that everyone understands that my affinity and affection for Bernie Sanders only goes as far as his fight for us. But boy, is that man not fighting for us. God damn. That speech on the floor. And he got it done. He made sure that everyone in this country who is filing for unemployment is going to get an additional $600 a week on top of, listen, can I tell you, that would have made all the difference back when I was unemployed and getting unemployment checks. So now people can bridge the gap just a little bit more. Those 3.3 million people. And they have Bernie Sanders to thank for that. Hashtag thank you, Bernie is trending number 4 across the nation because he literally did that. He stood there and he held the line. He was willing to take it on the chin from all the critics from the left and from the right. And when I say the left, I mean very loosely the Democratic Party. But he stood there and he did what was necessary to make sure that the people were taken care of. And yet he's flanked by men. I'm sure there's some women, Susan Collins, those types. But I'm thinking about 4 men in particular: Tim Scott, Rick Scott, Lindsey Graham, and one other guy. I forget who the 4th guy is. But I want to play some audio from these men so that you can understand the basis for my rage and my anger that you won't be able to tell by my tone. But perhaps maybe you should understand by my tone being so measured that the level of rage is to the point where I have to contain it. Because these men are showing us that they have no regard for the well-being of the people for whom they serve. We write their checks. First up, Skeletor himself, Rick Scott, former governor of the state of Florida, answering a question as to why him being the richest person in the Senate is concerned about individuals getting a little bit more money than they otherwise would have if not for this world-changing pandemic.
I don't know how to ask this without sounding like I'm being a smartass, and I'm not. But do you understand how bad the optics are to have probably the wealthiest person in the Senate potentially holding up this bill over a couple of $100 for some of the poorest people in this country?
You're not talking to me, but I'll weigh in.
Here's what I care about. I want to make sure that our small businesses, all of our businesses, including our hospitals, our nursing homes, everybody can make sure people want to come to work. And I also want to make sure, which I in the bill that does it, you have an unemployment system in the states that work, and we need to continue to work that, and we have a supplement to it. We've got to help them. But the moment we can go back to work, we cannot create an incentive for people to say, I don't need to come back to work because I can do better someplace else. These employers are going to need these workers to rebuild this economy. So we cannot be paying people more money on unemployment than what they would get paid in their job. So I'm very supportive of this amendment. It's the right thing. It's like what Tim said. People want to work, but don't create the wrong incentive. And if we do, we're going to hurt a lot of businesses and a lot of families in this country.
All I can hear in that, as someone mentioned on Twitter earlier, is the fact that he does not want the American worker to have the independence and the liberty to be able to deny or to refuse or to withhold, rather. That's what I'm looking for, to withhold their labor. It is so critical for the system for individuals to not have the autonomy and the freedom to withhold their labor. They don't want you to be able to withhold your labor. They don't want you to be able to withhold your consumption. They don't want you to be able to withhold your participation, because without your labor, your consumption, and your participation, this thing falls apart. Now, I'm going to talk about the political economy of this for a few minutes, but I'm going to circle back to the fact that these men, these wretched men, are so evil that they wanted to hold up. And if not for Bernie Sanders, they would have gotten away with it. They wanted to hold up this entire package, which is a bum deal to begin with. I mean, this is the insult to injury. This is a slush fund. In order for the American people, individuals, to get $1,200, they had to create a slush fund that's going to pour trillions into the private sector, into the markets, to the richest people in this country, in the world. And in spite of it being a slush fund that's going to just pour, an obscene amount of money into corporations, these four men and Republicans wanted to stand in the way of poor Americans from getting an additional $600 a week who have just lost their jobs. Okay. So there's a level of insidiousness here that suggests to me that these men they don't understand the times. They don't understand the score. I would personally be terrified of standing in front of the American people and saying, I'm going to give corporations trillions of dollars, but I don't think that you should get this additional $600 a week, even though that might be the difference between you starving and everything falling apart, right? That might be the difference between you being able to feed your kids and starving. That might be the difference between you being able to stay at home and not get sick. I'd be terrified of having this on the record in the middle. Actually, we're not even in the middle. I can't. Long for the day when we could see the middle of this crisis and then the end of this crisis. But right now we're at the very beginning. And at the very beginning of this crisis, we have men who look us in the face and tell us that poor people are not deserving, and they are not terrified. I would be horrified if the American people saw the corruption in my soul was so deep that in our darkest hour, I wanted to keep them from being able to survive. Why? Because I want to keep them desperate enough to go out in the middle of a plague. I'm doing my very best here. Doing my best. But they're not leaving me much of an option. They're not leaving the American people with much of an option. There's my music. I was waiting on it. We'll have a patron party, and then we'll get back to business.
Go to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show and support The Benjamin Dixon Show.
Here we go. All right. It's kind of, let me tell you something. This music might be our salvation. Because it's extremely difficult to be upset when the music is bopping like this. I don't know. Maybe I should take the music out so that we can all be furious. But anyway, here's the patron party. Very special welcome to Lisa Burnham. Thank you so much for becoming a patron. Ariana Peters. Thank you so much for becoming a patron. Angela Paris. Thank you so much for becoming a patron. You too can become a part of this prestigious and prodigious patron family by going to www.patreon.com/The BPD Show, where you will get twice the content and none of the ridiculous advertisements like you're going to hear right about here. Yep. Here we go. I've got the rhythm and the patterns and the guttural noises. I got that, but I would never, ever try to actually do a verse. I know I said I would, but I was really just joking. So anyway, back to these evil sons of bastards, right? These men who clearly have no regard for their own political future. Or do they just underestimate the American people? Do they figure that Americans are going to put up with anything that they dish out to us? What do you think their calculus is? Do you think that they honestly feel like they are above being held accountable? They feel like these are normal times in which the people are just going to sit idly by and be like, oh, well, the system says this, and so we're just going to sit here and let these men destroy us? Not all of them are up for reelection, but that's November. Like, if we limit the scope of my conversation to being merely about electoral politics for the sake of disclaimers and for the sake of disclaimers, then clearly they should understand that most of them are up for a reelection in November. So at a minimum, when I say Americans might have to pull up on these then I could just be talking only about pulling up on them politically speaking at the polls. Like, we're going to pull up to the polls. People are not going to forget this. So even on the most, positive outlook of how we could respond to this, operating within the electoral system, operating in this democratic process, they should have some concern considering the fact that this has changed. But what I am alluding to in no uncertain terms is that you've got 3.3 million newly unemployed individuals who are coming to grips with how quickly they lost everything, financially speaking. You couple that with the fact that every single one of them is going to know somebody who dies from this, right? Every single one of them is going to have somebody, hopefully nobody. I mean, some of them are going to die. Like, it's just like, this is a major thing. So when you consider the fact that is a, what is it called? A disruptive force on top of the disruptive force of them losing their jobs. I don't know that they really understand what that could mean for this country. And I'm not saying this to instigate it. I'm saying this to warn them. What the is wrong with you? What are you thinking? Right now, every single politician should be in crisis mode to protect this republic as well as their own political futures. Let's just, their political futures, if for no other reason but their own self-preservation, politically speaking. But no, they're carrying on like politics as usual. Here is Lindsey Graham.
You're a nurse, aide, making $15 or $16 an hour. You're on the front lines here. A lot of doctors' offices are going to have to roll back because elective surgery is no longer a source of income for a bunch of doctors. So you're going to have all these well-trained nurses that are going to make $24 an hour on unemployment. You're literally incentivizing taking people out of the workforce at a time when we need critical infrastructure supplied with workers.
Oh my God, they treat us like cattle. We have to make sure we have they treat us like they refuse to engage in good faith arguments because the logical conclusion of the good faith argument is to the benefit of the labor force at this juncture, because this coronavirus has demonstrated the significance of the workforce in a way that we haven't been able to do successfully through all the labor movements throughout history. And in this moment, the logical conclusion is that we need to do everything humanly possible to protect the labor force, which means that the American government needs to open up their checkbooks and write a check for everyone to stay home until it is safe to come outside. But because that is an empowering, I can never say empowering, it is an empowering notion that reminds the worker of just how critical they are in this entire equation. That is the poison that they believe is more dangerous than death itself. And that's why they're doing so much to convince people to just get up and go back to work. Why? Because, if we actually protected our labor force, then the labor force would realize how critical they are to this entire equation, and we would no longer just open up the coffers to give it away to the capitalists. We would open up our coffers and we would demand, the people would demand that we open up our coffers to take care of the people, the labor force. That's what this is all about, because and here's why. His arguments are bereft of any substance. Nobody can get unemployment if you voluntarily leave your job. Or if you turn down a job. That's part of the process. See, the thing is, as a person who's newly unemployed, you're going to find out that you have to apply for 3 jobs a week. Every week you have to apply for 3 jobs. You cannot turn down an offer. So as you're applying, you should apply for the very best jobs that you could possibly apply for, and not some bullshit, hourly, something that you're going to get easily. Like, no offense to anyone who works in fast food, but like if you apply for fast food and you get it, then all of a sudden that's the job that you have and your benefits run out. So it's not about offending anyone who has a lower paying job, but if you're coming from a 6-figure salary and now you applied for McDonald's and you got that job, guess what? You don't get unemployment insurance anymore. And I only bring that up to demonstrate the fallaciousness of the arguments that these guys are making. They never intended to argue in good faith anyway. Make sure that that's the subtext through which you understand this entire conversation, that all of these disingenuous bastards, these ass bastards, never intended to engage in good faith. And so what they're trying to do right now is to keep the labor force disempowered. That's what this is about. So they are arguing in bad faith. 1, you would not get unemployment if you leave voluntarily. 2, you will not get unemployment once you get an offer. And if you take unemployment and you have an offer, you literally have to pay it back. So all of the things that they said yesterday are in bad faith, but they never intended to engage in good faith in the first place. And I personally would not want to be on the receiving end of the ire of 3.3 million people who are now newly unemployed in the middle of a pandemic. They no longer have health insurance. Their money very well could run out before they get their first check. And so their kids could be hungry. And what's worse, people are dying all around them, and some of them are already infected and don't really know it. I would be trying to kiss the ass of every single American, doing anything I possibly could to preserve this republic. But these evil bastards think that no one will pull up to the polls, that is, right? We're talking politically speaking, obviously. So joining me now is Professor Matt Sienkiew, a friend of the show. He has hosted the show many times, professor from Boston College. Professor, how are you?
I'm hanging in there, Ben. Isn't that like the worst question you have to ask people these days?
Yeah, no, it really is. It's a couple of things about that. It's like we're going to have to find a new greeting because nobody is going to be doing good. But then also, like, what I find myself doing already on Facebook is apologizing to people, like when people are dying, and on Twitter, like people are dying, and I'm like, I'm so sorry. And like after the 18th time saying it, I'm like, okay, I really got to find something else to say here because I have a feeling, unfortunately, we're going to be saying it a lot.
Yeah, no, I mean that is true. You also get this problem where, really, I'm fine. Nobody in my household is coughing, and that's really all that matters individually, right? I mean, in terms of what's going on here, nobody's hungry, nobody's coughing.
Yeah.
The sort of individual day-to-day stresses, right? It's hard to put them in perspective. And, in some ways we shouldn't be responsible to put them in perspective. We have our own experiences, but at the same time, when you read about, and then as they become closer and closer to you, these horrors, I think I'm just going to have to start learning to say good. Right. When you ask me, how are you doing? I'm going to say good, unless somebody is really not good.
Right.
But that said, I mean, the disruption of life is a real thing. And man, I got two little kids running around the house. I got a mother living at home who's had severe health issues in the past. And it doesn't feel good, but moment to moment. In other words, I'm going to restate, Ben. Ask me again how I'm doing.
How you doing, Matt?
I'm doing good, Ben. I'm doing
good. Good. I'm doing good too. I'm doing good. I think a lot of people say is we're as good as can be expected, right? We're as good as could be expected in the middle of a global pandemic that is claiming the lives of thousands of people globally, and at the exponential rate of the spread and the fecklessness of our government and our officials, the spread is going to continue. We're going to see a lot more news like I saw this morning that kind of, I'm not going to lie, for a minute there this morning, I was broken. I was, I'm pretty transparent with my audience, but I was literally just curled up in my bed and I couldn't cry. There's this thing that I struggle with. Like, I cry, but I can't really cry. And like, even when my father passed, like, I shed tears, but I couldn't cry to the point of a release, like a mourning kind of mournful cry. And so I'm like, this morning, I'm like, I feel like I need to cry because in New York, they're shipping bodies now. They're using refrigerator trucks to store the bodies because the morgues are all full. They are outsourcing across the country now and across the globe. They're places that have ice skating rinks. They are outsourcing those to become the new morgues because there are just so many bodies piling up. And that news, along with some news close to home, a friend of a friend, like, it's just seeing just people, it's getting closer and closer. And, with every person, that's a tragedy that has like shaken the foundations of an entire family for the rest of their lives. And that level of scale of trauma is something that we haven't experienced collectively as a nation in our lifetime.
No, I mean, that's definitely right. In some ways, we've been lucky. Obviously individuals have their challenges, but we, our shores, at least as Americans, have not been visited by much. I'm 39 years old. I think you're in that ballpark, Ben. Yeah. I mean, globally, we've seen some obvious,
horrors.
Horrors. And look, there's been moments. We don't need to highlight them in recent American history, but in terms of that feeling of siege or, pandemics. I mean, this is not, this is something we've seen in this country, right? The Spanish flu, the polio epidemic, just the world wars and things where it was, where we could really feel these global horrors. This is really the first one that is coming to us. And, we might be sort of, particularly ill-equipped to deal with it. I mean, soft underbelly kind of stuff, but which good for us, honestly. I mean, I guess you might argue we should have more feel more for the parts of the world that have faced these things, but we certainly are learning how to cope with it minute to minute, and that's that's something we have to do. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen just because you say be tough.
Yeah, no, that's the reality. I mean, the reality is that there are going to be a lot of mornings. The one morning I did actually cry was the morning I had a friend who was a little bit younger than me. He was a father of two. He passed away suddenly, like the night before. We were all laughing on Facebook, and the next morning he was gone. And it wasn't until I went, like I went to work like 4 hours late that morning here in Atlanta, and one of the coworkers, like, he just saw me and he grabbed me and hugged me, and that broke me down. Like, I was like, well, I was good till you showed me some affection. Like, you showed me, some empathy.
That's good, right? I mean, I think that part of what you're pointing to here, I mean, obviously the first degree terror and tragedy of people dying, but given the scale of things, not having the ability to process and express these things is a second layer, and that's going to have serious health effects too. So that person hugging you and bringing those tears out of you, I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist, but it seems anybody who's lived knows you need to do that sometimes, right? And you just gotta have you need somebody to sort of let you unfurl, right? Let you get rid of that, not get rid of, but process through it, express it. And I mean, the way you're describing these situations with people who lose loved ones, and they literally can do nothing but try to get the body in a truck and away. I mean, that's the extra thing that we're also going to be dealing with, obviously, that we have no idea how to, right? I mean, normally when tragedy strikes, I mean,
there's a process.
You have a chance, right? You have a chance, and other people care. I mean, and that's like one of the scariest things, is we're going to get to the point where it's going to be very hard to care, about hearing this news. And I mean, I think on the one hand, it seems terrible to be so dour. On the other hand, this seems like mathematical fact right now. We got to start thinking about it and be on the lookout. And I mean, it might seem sappy, but you got to take that minute every time you hear or see something to try to really feel it and express it, and give people that sense, that hug that you got, right? That made you cry. We got to try to give those. Right.
And I think you and I, we look through this through a different lens than, or people in our similar age group and our station in life. Like, we have young kids, and we are literally trying to protect our children from this monster that is outside of our door. And we are still trying to calculate, how do we maintain a system that they can thrive in? How do we ensure that they have a future? And what's extremely frustrating to me is the fact that we have these men in power, men and women, but particularly men in power, who seem to be doing their damnedest to unravel this society with their decision making. And I mean, there's a whole lot to that conversation that we could get into, but it's just before we get into the politics of it, it's just like, it kind of would be easier if we didn't have children, right? But here we are, we're doing the societal thing that you do. And now we have children, we have aging parents, and we're like dead smacking. This is not to say that somebody without children is not feeling this. Like there's probably someone who doesn't have children who are uniquely targeted by this virus, or they're elderly or whatever the case may be. But it's like going out into the living room and watching my kids laugh and play and smile, completely oblivious to what's happening around them, is simultaneously like, it gives me life, but it also makes me mourn on the inside as well.
No, that's right. I mean, on the one hand, it's the greatest gift you can have, because, assuming you don't think this ends civilization, which, to be clear, I do not.
Right.
Then, okay, like no matter what, if you, whether you have kids or not, but, just society is going to go on. We have to worry about those next steps. It gives us something to do. Secondly, I mean, it's hard to on a bright side. It's not the right thing, but at least we're not seeing infant mortality and child mortality. Hopefully, it stays that way. Yeah, that gives us. I mean,
I think that would bring us to our knee. I think that would bring our society to its knees. There's something unique about that I don't know if we have the strength for.
Well, I mean, it's really deep stuff there, right? It's like we have, especially in the Western world, we do a terrible job processing our own mortality.
Yeah.
And the one thing that keeps us, sort of sane with this, I would argue, at least in my experience, is thinking, well, okay, the world keeps going, right? There's the, regardless of your religious beliefs or whatever else, there's the next generation to come, and you can work towards that if you're sort of a decent person. Have you seen the movie Children of Men?
Yes.
Where it's a sci-fi world in which the infertility sweeps across the world, and it depicts this chaos and sort of breakdown of society, and that to me hits home very hard.
Yeah.
And it does, makes me think of books I've read about the polio epidemic and, previous diseases which have ravaged children. And I think for a minute, like, well, at least we don't have that. Yeah. In terms of that unique situation, I mean, there's being that in-between generation, right? Where, we've got kids who we need to protect, and they don't have self-protective instincts with this. And then also, I mean, taking care of my mother, that boomer generation has been notoriously not great about taking this seriously. And it's like, it's not funny, but it's funny in a way. It's just like you become the mom or the dad, like in both directions, right? Like I've got both my children saying, but why can't I do this? And like my mother saying, well, my friends are doing this.
I'm sorry. Like, listen,
it can be funny. It's like,
I totally have I have shifted my audience to be able to accept laughter at the wrong times. Like, we're just going to laugh in the middle of this. Like if there's anything that we can do, like, for instance, I posted this morning, just on Twitter about I forgot which rage post that I posted, but somebody put in a meme that was completely irrelevant, had nothing to do with anything. It was a GIF or a GIF, depending on who you're arguing with. And then all of a sudden there was a guy in the background who just put up a picture that said, buy Bitcoin. And for whatever reason,
I don't know why either, but
it was exactly what I needed at the moment. Completely inappropriate for the level of stress that I was expressing, but the laughter at the most inappropriate time seemed to help. So we're gonna laugh through this if nothing else.
Yeah, I mean, one of my areas of writing and research is comedy, and I mean, 100% there is a core function there. I mean, I do sometimes see myself as like the 80s sitcom dad, right? Facing to both. I literally have to ask my mother, well, if all your friends jumped off the Brooklyn Bridge or whatever, like it's very. But there's something about being in this sort of in between generation that this particular crisis. I'm not saying it's harder, but it's like it's very it's jarring to the extent that you You know, it seems to be where the only people who are concerned with this in my circle, right?
Right, because you know, I have some Zoomer friends, some young friends who are like, oh man, you tripping? Like, wait, stop bothering us, blah blah blah. We're trying to, you know, we're going out, we're partying, and I just had to honestly say, you know what? Hey, whatever happens to you, and I just had to let them go. And then I have churches, like, you know, I'm like really inserted in the church world. So I'm talking to all of these older people, you know, churches are, you know, skew age wise, very old. And I have all these old people who I literally had to cuss some of them out for them to understand how dire the situation was and how serious they need to take this. And the problem is like, we're dead smack in the middle. And we're having to yell up and we're having to yell down and just kind of grab as many people as we can. Meanwhile, we have older people who tell us we don't know what we're talking about, and this is all some kind of conspiracy. Then you have younger people who are like, oh, well, this isn't going to affect us, so we're going to go out and party anyway.
It's been a while, Ben, since I've been on here. You weren't, you know, last time we recorded, we were in like a Target. We were in like
that's right. You were here in Atlanta, and we recorded in Target. That wasn't that long ago, though. It wasn't that okay. So it was a lifetime ago.
It was one pandemic ago, and you weren't famous back then.
I mean, I don't consider myself famous now, but I do have to take in consideration that I probably am not self-aware of the impact that I kind of sort of have now. You know, I had a tweet the other day directly challenging the federal government, go super viral. It had like 132,000 likes and 30,000 retweets. Yeah. And I'm like, you know what? I might need to take a step back and reconsider, you know, exactly not in the sense of me being famous, but in terms of the reach and the implications of what is doing the reaching. I might need to just have a little more self-awareness there.
Yeah, I should be a lot more nervous right now. I just thought of it.
Thank you for saying it like that. I wasn't nervous. That's like the one thing I'm not nervous about. Like, I don't really get nervous about the fact that some of the things that I say will, you know, actually go far enough to be on the radar of the FBI. You know what I mean? And like, cause really the same day Donald Trump said, we're getting ready to go back to work, I basically said, I literally said, F that, F you, and kiss our ass. Do not obey the government. And that so, you know, but I have no problem saying that, because here's the thing is like, we're at a crossroad. All right. And we're being led. Let's get into the politics of it. Like, we're being led by people who are really positioning us for the worst impact. Right. I don't expect for civilization to collapse by any measure. Right. But considering we just had 3.3 million unemployment claims this week.
Yeah.
And then you compound that with the fact that you're going to have a lot of those people doubly mourning because they are going to lose loved ones, or they're going to lose someone extended to them. You know, that's not a recipe for politics as usual. I think these people in Washington really should be addressing this from the perspective of how do we best preserve this republic. But what they're doing is, how do we best preserve the capitalistic system that existed before this crisis?
And to me, I mean, I agree with everything you just said. So it's just going to be but so, I mean, I will say that, you know, a few different semi-responsible countries have taken somewhat different approaches to this.
Yeah.
None of them have taken the approach of absurd mixed messaging, whiplash, back and forth, randomly throwing out dates and times. Easter, right? I don't want to look for religious purposes, a very important day. It has no relation to this virus, right? The idea of and there's something about that messaging to me, which is that extra level of irresponsibleness, like as though that day is really important, so the virus will stop. Like we can pace it to that or something.
Right.
I mean,
the absurdity of it. It's so absurd. Like the biggest thing that, like, my refrain, there's a refrain in my head that I'm going to put in this book that I'm writing, and I've already put it on Twitter. It's like can we not see ourselves Right. The absurdity of it all. It is just so patently ridiculous that if anybody looked back in history, like you don't even have to be in the future looking back from a historical perspective. Like if we just paused and reflected on yesterday and see how utterly ridiculous our society, our American society has become, and we were able to look at it through the objective lens of a future historian, we would be appalled at what we're doing to ourselves right now and the number of people who are literally going to die as a result of the absurdity.
Right. No, I think that's right. And I think it's we've seen huge mistakes in American history, right? That's not unique.
Right.
It's the fecklessness. It's the utter rudderlessness, the complete lack of vision, perspective. I mean, it's also the symbolism of Fauci standing behind Trump there. It's like the only guy who knows anything, and who knows how much control he really has over anything, but he's just got to stand there and try to like yank the oars or whatever every 2 minutes in these press conferences, which, by the way, the media should not be covering these press conferences.
Yeah.
I mean, utterly, they have nothing but sort of campaign rally things going on. But it's even like you look at the most enormous mistakes of our lifetimes. You look at the war in Iraq and whatever else. These were done through following through on theories that at least could be explained.
Yeah.
Now, the theories were intensely stupid and could have been identified as such by smart people at the time, so I'm not excusing them at all. But this is a different kind of thing where this theory of kind of like acting as though you can lever the economy and health like one and the other. You know what I mean? Like
they're inseparable.
Like a
exactly.
video game character where if you give him a little more like speed, he loses a little strength or something. Like what
are we doing?
Sophomoric way of looking at. I mean, long term, if you're worried about the economy, I mean, like all I know is that dead people are very bad consumers. Right? Like, I mean, I'm not saying that economic elements, because fundamentally economics is getting people food and stuff is economics, right? I mean, like,
right.
It's not like we throw economics out the window, but the idea that like, well, we could do a little more health or a little more economics, like, it's
the absurdity of it all. It is so preposterous. It is like, how do we get here? And honestly, I guess this is the inevitable conclusion, I hope. And when I say conclusion, I don't mean of humanity. We're going to be fine. I don't mean of America. America is going to be fine. I hope that this is the inevitable conclusion of the idiocracy that we have unwittingly been a part of, right? We joke about the movie Idiocracy, but we have certainly been in a declining idiocracy for quite some time. Probably all of you, the two of us, we're both 39, probably the entirety of our lives.
Right. Reagan takes over when I'm 4 months old or whatever.
Exactly.
So
exactly. And we have been on this trajectory for so long because in order to maintain this system, it has required a new level of absurdity every 4 years. It requires a new level of absurdity, a new extension of fallacious arguments to the point where they have nowhere else to go. And so they have to argue the absurd. And here is the culmination in a pandemic. And I believe, I mean, the optimist in me says that we're going to make it. We're going to be fine overall. We're going to be bruised. We're going to be battered. But human ingenuity is going to bring us and save our asses yet again. And we can grow from here. But it has to be a complete repudiation, a complete and total repudiation of the anti-science, the movement of the know nothingness of our society.
Yeah, no, I mean, you had mentioned this. I don't know if you've expressed this elsewhere, but you're sort of you expressed the idea that one way or another, presidents often seem to be tasked with the one thing they can't possibly deal with.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's true that Trump would be bad in a war, but he's worse here, right? Because his fundamental flaw, I mean, it's not really. I mean, he's just sort of, I don't know. When it comes to, I mean, we've seen him deal with military things. There's something sort of restrictive also about his incompetence there. That's sort of a risk aversion or something. But he and while lies are bad in wars, they're kind of part of it, and ultimately decisions get made by war people.
Yeah.
Whereas the real sort of reason he's here, right, is bad information, misinformation, lies. People willing to believe the thing right in front of their face isn't true because they prefer not to, and whatever. And this is the kind of crisis where that's the most deadly thing,
Right.
Because we need actual everyday citizens to make good decisions every day,
right?
And we have a leader who not only makes bad decisions,
but is encouraging that we make bad decisions
on bad information.
On bad,
right? On bad information. This is the perfect thing for him to
really
be bad
screw
at,
us,
right?
Yeah.
If it's a war, yeah, he'd make terrible decisions. You'd hope that like the role of a general like really is a serious thing in a war. They control the soldiers fairly effectively.
Right.
There's no generals here, right? And we are the quote, the military metaphor breaks down, but we are the people who matter, right? We are the soldiers, and there's nobody. I mean, there's no mitigating force.
So
right?
it doesn't.
We just have to make decisions.
It doesn't break down when you consider the front line, our doctors. Right. And the nurses, they are literally going into battle every single day and could come out with the virus that could kill them. And we saw a nurse in New York who died as a result of contracting the virus while he was helping other people. So and your metaphor does not break down at all. But to what you were saying, yesterday, Matt and I had a conversation offline. Was it yesterday or the day before? It was the day before. It was like Tuesday, maybe.
Days are, well, like it could have been 2 days ago or it could have been 1996.
It could have been. It is. We are in some serious time warping here. But I mentioned that it seems we have to take into consideration with every future president that this individual's weakness is what is literally going to be tested during their administration, because that's how it's played out. It played out that way with Barack Obama. Which Matt offered up an example that I'll let you give that example, Matt, because I think it was brilliant. It also played itself out with 9/11 with George W. Bush, because his weakness was his bloodlust, the neoconservative bloodlust at the time, and has mired us in a generation-long war. And we see just with your boy Bill Clinton, his let me use a church term, his lasciviousness, right?
Very nice. I like that.
Right.
Yes.
He was tested, and that became the moment that almost destroyed his presidency. But in this case, like particularly with Bush and with Trump, their test is something that drags the entire nation into a point of crisis.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's astute. I mean, I don't think it's magic. I think it's that,
4 years is a long time.
I think it's 4 years. Yeah, I think that's really important. I think it's just 4 years is a long time, and basically everything will happen, or there's something from each genre is likely to come in. But the other thing is that part of how we do our political branding or whatever is these people sort of take on. There's a tendency towards a monocausal kind of way of branding candidates, right? With Trump, with Obama, for example, right? You say like, well, what's the case here? I mean, I would argue that Obama's strength and weakness was his devotion to cool, right? Not necessarily sunglass wearing cool, but keeping his cool, right? And what is he eventually charged to do? I mean, I look at the most significant moment there globally being Syria and sort of the aftermath of the Arab Spring, and he had branded himself as cool, as somebody who can always take a step back approach. And I'm not sure what the right thing to do was there, but the things we did nothing to mitigate what became an absolute global crisis of humanitarian and refugee disasters which will have a knock-on effect here, right?
Yeah.
All this displacement and the that fell out from that.
We're still going to feel those. That impact is going to be like, can you imagine not only the refugees, but also the people who are still mired in that conflict right now in the middle of a pandemic?
Right. I mean, these things all compound, right? I mean, you can, on the one hand, that's just how history is, one thing after another, but you can tell a story of, we could go back as far as we want. If we just start this millennium, right? W's, bloodlust, leading to incredible destabilization, the inability for us to kind of calm this down, and perhaps being too averse to take a strong position in the Obama years when we could have, and then being ripe for something like this to come on and just exacerbate everything. I think that with Trump, the weakness is the weakness they think he's never going to deal with is something where it's not just symbolic what we do with bad information. Right. It's not just like a sort of political fight about it, but it's actually life and death. Yeah. Right. When information becomes life and death, he is the most killer person possible. Right. Because he doesn't just like give you false information. He obliterates information.
Right.
He creates, he sows confusion. He destroys the notion of stable facts. And one thing that he really is particularly good / terrible at, right? And frankly, this whole era of Trump has been, is while on the one hand, we've gotten so good with data, on the other hand, we've gotten so bad at understanding it. Right. And, Trump's always committed to the idea of finding exceptions and trying to use that to disprove rules. Right. You can look at the data about crime amongst, not undocumented immigrants and find that, it's a low number. Right. But he wants to show you the one person who committed a crime and have you get scared about it. Right. Yes. Well, you can see how that plays out with this sort of thing here, where it's very clear that there are these patterns in the data with the virus. The edges are fuzzy, but you get some basic ideas. No doubt, right? Him and his people, they want to point to examples here and there that could be this, it could be that. Right? These little things that kind of pop out, and they don't fit the curve perfectly. And this is just the era that we're in, and he's the worst president possible to guide us through a moment where we have to trust the fact that A, science is the best thing we have here, and B, it's imperfect. It's imperfect. There are things in there we're not going to understand, and you just go with your best option.
Okay. So that was the conversation I had. Well, that was a portion of it. I have a whole another half hour or so with Professor Sienkiew that will be in the bonus, in the patrons only episode coming up immediately after this music. Thank you so much for joining us all that did. If you want to get the full show, I have a whole lot more after this music. Even though I've given you 52 minutes today, there's still a lot more after this for patrons. Patreon.com/the BPD show. Thanks so much. Take care of yourselves. Love on somebody, and I'll see you tomorrow.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.patreon.com/the BPD show and support the Benjamin Dixon Show. If you like this episode, be sure to share, like, and subscribe.